And I want to touch on something that you kind of mentioned a little bit earlier, which was that you said people like Natan Sharansky and others who dealt with isolation was to try and see things from other people's perspectives and challenge your own thoughts, your own preconceptions of things. And this is something that I think you do quite a lot of when you analyze different Torah narratives, and you try to help us understand sometimes some of the characters in the Torah who do bad things, or who we might even consider to be bad people. Certainly help us try to understand where the brothers were coming from when they did something to Joseph, where Ishmael was coming from because he felt hard done by. And I just wondered, I think we even touched on this in our last interview that we did when we were together in person. I think it's fascinating to look at the reasons why people do things. I think there is even a midrash, a Torah commentary that I think it writes a letter on behalf of, maybe it's Pharaoh or Haman, where he explains why he feels the way he does towards the Jews. I can't remember what it was, but I just wondered, how do you get the balance between, and this doesn't just apply to Torah characters, but also in life, how do you get the balance between understanding where someone comes from and eventually making a judgment on the way someone acted, or even sometimes who someone is? To say that was bad, that was evil, or you are evil because you did that. Ultimately, I understand where you came from, but ultimately that's who you are. How do you get that balance? And by the way, I was even discussing this with a friend of mine, because there was someone within the Jewish community who did something very bad, and a rabbi of mine who I really respect. And I've always been taught to think that we should judge. We're told to judge people favorably, but he did something really, really bad, and the rabbi said, "This is, this is not a good person." And I was thinking, again, hold on. I thought we're not. Are we allowed to make judgments on someone? Are we not allowed to make judgments on someone? Can we just, judge their actions? But should we try to understand where they're coming from? I think you understand where I'm getting at with this. How do you get that balance right?
Well, one of the interesting things I think is that if you look at, I think to some extent we could take a lead from the Torah itself, which is, how often do you, and let me ask you this question, Ollie, how often do you find, just in the five books of Moses, from whatever knowledge you have of the five books of Moses, how often do you find the Torah overtly making value judgments about people, right? Letting you know that the Torah thinks a person is bad, categorizing a person as evil. Can you name an example, right? Does that happen a lot in the Torah? Does it happen a little bit in the Torah? Does it happen at all in the Torah? What would you say?
I can think of many times where actions are called bad or evil, but I can't think of a time where a person is called evil.
Right. I can't even think of it either. Now, it's true that the rabbis later on commenting will attach that designation to certain people. They will talk about Bilam Harasha, right, or something like that, the Bilam, the evil prophet, or something. But the Torah notably doesn't, right? The Torah doesn't attach that, even though Bilam is clearly an enemy, or becomes an enemy of the Jews in terms of his actions. The Torah is very careful about not attaching that designation. Similarly with Esav, Esav is one of those characters that really that can rile us up. But if you look at the text is very careful about not labeling these people for someone. And I think, part of that is that in as much as the Torah is trying to teach us how to act, I think one way to think about the balance you're talking about, and I think there's a Mishnah in Pirkei Avot to this effect too, at least the way I understand the Mishnah. But I'll get to the Mishnah in a moment if you like. But basically, I think the way the Torah sets things up is there is a judge in the world, and therefore there are, we can't just simply take the moral relativistic position that I'm okay, you're okay, everything is fine. There are absolute standards of behavior, and there is a judge in the world, but we are not that judge, right? God is the judge. So part of the balance is understanding that there are absolute values and absolute values to which we are held, but we are not those who hold others to them. God is the one who holds others to them. and therefore the Torah, in teaching us how to act, basically saying it isn't your job to try to decide who the evil person here is here and who the righteous person is. God's a big boy and he can figure that out, right? Your
Ever.
job is to
We can't
look
ever do that.
and to ask yourself, what is it that you can learn from these other folks' behavior? And if you think about, literature, any whether that literature is history or whether that literature is fiction, it doesn't really matter. But one of the great benefits of reading literature, including the Bible, which is a kind of literature, is to be able to have the benefit of learning from others' experiences, right? We don't have to make the same mistakes as others because we get to read about them. And what's interesting about fiction is that what good fiction tries to do is also not label things. Good fiction will not label a character, but will draw you into their world, help you understand how they made choices, help you understand perhaps how they deceived themselves, help you understand the dynamics of how bad choices got made, while giving you some sympathy for that character. And I think what that really does is it is able to, again, it's that same Natan Sharansky dynamic of playing white and playing black. If I'm Ollie and I'm reading about some character, Holden Caulfield, and to The Catcher in the Rye or whatever character that is, so I'm playing black, right? I'm Ollie Annisfeld. I'm David Fohrman. I'm viewing this character from the outside. The challenge of the author is to say, no, it's not enough for you to play black. I want you to play white. Now understand what it's like to be Holden Caulfield from the inside. Can I make this character sympathetic enough while still making him flawed enough that I can draw you into his world and understand why he would act this kind of way? And then you can come back to being David Fohrman and make and look at it from the outside, but then you can look at it from the inside. And it's that kind of dynamic through which real learning comes from. Therefore, I think if we're reading the Bible, one of the most valuable tools that we can use, in addition to just being a careful reader and noticing things in the text and textual anomalies and all the other things that I try to do when I read the Bible. But in addition to all of that, one of the great, most powerful things we can do is to sort of consciously put ourselves in the shoes of another character and ask ourselves, let me not look at her or him as me. Let me look at her or him as them, and then read the story as them and ask myself how the story seems a little bit different as them than as David Fohrman. And you can, it's Pesach time right now. You can try this at home. Try this with Pharaoh, try this with Miriam, and you'll find fascinating things come up, right? And here is Pharaoh, who's the architect, arguably, of the first genocide in history, throwing little babies in the Nile in an attempt to cull the herd, an attempt to minimize, Israelite population. And ask yourself, where is he coming from, and what leads him to this monstrosity? Is it that he's inherently a monster? And if you look at where the Torah is coming from, the Torah actually gives you something of his motivation. It's really interesting to put yourself in Pharaoh's shoes, which is Pharaoh becomes paranoid about a population explosion of a benign sector of the population that are immigrants, essentially, that are Gerim in the land, which is us, and we become too numerous, and all of a sudden Pharaoh is worried about war and worried about what might be, and there's very little reason to be worried other than this scary population explosion and the mind games of what might be, what might be, what might be. And suddenly Pharaoh's dehumanizing and sort of proactively treating this population as an enemy without the slightest provocation. And it tells you that's how people can behave. And it's a scary kind of thing. And you occupy his shoes and see how easy it is to go down that path. Miriam, it's such for the first time, I think I began to understand Miriam a little bit more this year just by doing that. I mean, Miriam's name, if you had to take Miriam's name apart into two words, Ollie, right? What does her name kind of sound like?
Miriam, maybe bitter waters, bitter sea.
Bitter waters, bitter, vast waters that are bitter. Now, why do you, and now, and why do you think Miriam of all people might have that name? Think about her experience from the inside. Why would she be called bitter vast waters?
Because she was born at a time of genocide where the
And
Jewish
what was
people
the
were
instrument of genocide?
drowning baby Jewish boys.
And what do we know about Miriam? Miriam has this little brother, Moses, and the mother tries to hide Moses for 3 months until she just can't do it anymore. And put yourself in the mother's shoes. What would it be like to be her, to try to keep your child silent? But after 3 months, you realize you just can't do it anymore. The stormtroopers are at the door. The Gestapo's coming. They know there's a baby there. You can't keep him safe. So then you put him in this little box by the Nile. Ollie, what are the chances that, you don't know the end of the story? What are the chances that in that environment that the child survives in that little box in the bulrushes,
Close to
right?
zero. Close to zero.
Vanishingly close to zero.
Yeah.
So when you're putting that box there, it's not a little boat that's going to miraculously save the child. It's probably a coffin that the mother is like, at least he should have some burial. It's the bitterest moment, right? And if you think about the word bitter, the word bitter is the word that the Torah uses to describe the slavery experience, right? Vayimararu et chayehem b'avodat kasha. They embittered their lives. And it began with slavery, but then there was genocide. But with the genocide, interestingly enough, guess who survived? It was always the girls. And God said that Pharaoh says that kill the boys, the kol imbati v'chaya. But if it's a daughter, then she lives. Now, what's it like to be the daughter who lives? Vayimaru et chayehen, bitter chai. And then there's the daughter who's chai. The daughter becomes the bitter one, right? If I'm the girl and my brothers have been wiped out in the Nile, and I'm the mother, right? The evil genius of Pharaoh is, if you think about it, it's crazy. If I'm Pharaoh, why am I killing females? I should be killing males if I'm worried about the population explosion. Why am I killing males? I should be killing females if I'm worried about the population explosion. If I call the females, then they can't reproduce. Why am I killing the males? The answer is he's trying to embitter the females, right? Imbati v'chaya. The bittersweet truth for every female is I live, but at what price? And the survivor's guilt of watching the little baby boys drown in the Nile is enough to destroy fertility. Who's going to have babies in a world like that? And the nation stops. And that was Pharaoh's genius. And here is Miriam, who's the one person who succeeds, the one person who at that moment that the mother places her in the Nile, nobody looked at that child except for one person, and it was Miriam. She stands from afar to see what's going to be with that child, which means that she still had some hope. But what an act of courage that took. As she scanned the steel gray, waters of the Nile, right, and without knowing the ending of the story, watching the daughter of Pharaoh approach, Hitler's daughter, the worst person in the world who could approach at that moment, what would you have thought about those waters that are about to swallow your child, your brother alive? They're the bitterest waters in the world, this big, vast reservoir of bitter waters. That's Miriam, right? But she's the one who succeeds, right? Who beats back the bitter waters, who stands and watches anyway, and becomes the instrument of salvation and helps save her brother. But so I think it always pays to be able to occupy, the get out of yourself and say, what is it like to be this person?
But what
It's
notion of
always
Miriam were you saying we had that you're challenging?
What's that?
What notion of Miriam are you challenging that we
like
had?
if you don't do this, right? So you can read the story without putting yourself in Miriam's shoes. Say, oh, Miriam, cute little girl, hung out by the Nile,
Right.
made friends with the daughter of Pharaoh, ends
Right.
up singing the song at the sea. She's a great singer. She's a bit player. She's the sister of Moshe. Without really, again, it's different seeing Miriam from the outside. She's much more of a two-dimensional figure. Miriam from the inside is much more of a bittersweet figure. She's much more real. So I'm just saying that, and I think that's true in general. When we see people from the outside, they tend to be two-dimensional. They begin to become three-dimensional when I'm willing to get out of my skin and ask myself, what is it like to be them?
And do you think there are times when, if you go into the three-dimensional understanding of a person, that our value judgment on who they are or even their actions can be radically changed in the Torah?
Yeah, and I think what the Torah is saying is before you start judging, seek to understand, right? It's the Stephen Covey principles. First seek to understand, then to be understood, right? So when I do that in any conversation, any attempt to understand, right, I need to understand your experience I can before I can come back to me and seek to make sense of it and seek to impose anything upon it. And so
But it doesn't mean we can't make value
yeah,
judgments
I
on
mean,
actions.
if you look at what's that?
But it doesn't mean that we can't, at the end of the day, even once we understand all the dimensions, it doesn't mean we can't make value judgments on people's actions at the end of the
No, and I
day.
think in a certain way, but the value judgments become more meaningful, right?
Right,
It's one thing to have a two-dimensional picture of Pharaoh and call him a monster.
right,
That's not very helpful. It
right,
doesn't teach us much.
right,
It just says, "Yay, we're on the Jews team.
right,
Pharaoh's on the blue team, and I'm on the yellow team,
right,
and he's evil." Right? It's like Darth Vader. You know he's bad because he's wearing black. Great, excellent. He's wearing black the first time I see him, and Princess Leia's wearing white. I guess I'm on the white team. What about Darth Vader makes him bad? What about Princess Leia makes her good? It's two-dimensional characters. All I'm doing is playing with herd mentality and saying, this is my team. I'm going to root for my team. Whereas if you come in and you say, okay, so here's what makes Darth Vader, right? And now I have some understanding from the inside, and he's evil. And look at this monstrous things that he did, but look at how he got there. So then I can learn something from it. Because I think at the end of the day, you have to ask yourself, what's the point of making value judgments, right? There's two possibilities, right? One point is because I am the judge and the jury, and it is my job in the world to condemn people or to celebrate them, right? Because it is me who is the judge. And I think the Torah basically says, and again, that's that Mishnah that it's a fascinating Mishnah. I'll show it to you in a moment. But I think the Torah's position is that's not true. You aren't the judge and the jury, right? God is the judge and the jury. So then the question is, okay, so then why should I be making value judgments? And I think the answer is because I learn from them, right? Because if I'm able to say, whoa, stepping outside, if I play black, in other words, if I'm David Fohrman and I see what Pharaoh does, you just did this monstrous thing, right? Now I occupy Pharaoh's position and I say, oh, well, Pharaoh thinks he's looking out for his country's national security and he became paranoid. But now playing David Fohrman, look at this monstrous thing that he did. That dynamic of going from black to white, black to white, black to white allows me to make a value judgment that teaches me something, which teaches me, look how easy it is to play the national security card and to end up using that ultimately as a paper tiger excuse for becoming a monster.
right.
And now I've learned something, right? But if I never engage in the black, white exercise, I can never learn that.
Right. I wasn't saying it so much as about making value judgments, saying that it's useful in order to be judge and jury, or even just to learn lessons. The reason why I was asking, is it necessary, is because sometimes in life, when you have relationships with people, especially close relationships, sometimes when you need to decide, is this someone that I need to step away from a little bit, or I need to get closer to, or I need to understand more, or I need to protect myself more. It's all very well understanding where someone's coming from, and that can certainly help in a relationship. But I feel like sometimes you need to be able to say, okay, I understand where you're coming from, but ultimately, at the end of the day, what you did was understandable, and I made a mistake, or what you did was unfair to me, And so I feel like for personal relationships, it's helpful.
Yes, I think you're exactly right. I think the one exception to the rule that I just discussed with you is your own personal relationships. which, by the way, the Mishnah in Pirkei Avot, which I keep on referring to,
But not
makes
revealing.
that exception.
So
right?
what is it?
I'll show you the Mishnah.
Okay.
Let me see if I can call it up on Svaria for a moment. Avot 1. Yeah, so I think it's 5 here. No, really, yeah.
Is it about putting yourself in someone else's shoes?
Yeah, so it's Mishnah 1, it's chapter 1, Mishnah 6 and 7, right? So if you look at the Mishnah and really read it through, it's all of these issues. Yoshua ben Prachia v'nitai rabbeili kiplu mem. Yoshua ben Prachia omer. Joshua ben Prachia says, Aseh lecha rav u'knei lecha chaver v'vidanat kol adam l'kaf zchut. Make for yourself a mentor. Connect, acquire for yourself a friend. V'vidanat kol adam l'kaf zchut. Right, and judge everyone favorably. The way I see that Mishnah is a certain kind of triangle, almost a vision of right triangle. I'm at the base of a right triangle. If I look at my friend is horizontally oriented towards me. He's over here. If I look at my mentor, he's vertically oriented. He's up here. And together, this makes a right triangle. Now, the hypotenuse, right, this line over here, is everybody else, right? Havidanat kol adam l'kaf zchut. Judge everybody else favorably. But perhaps the two exceptions to judge everybody favorably are two very important people in the world. And those two important people are your mentor and your friend, right? Because your mentor and your friend, you can't afford to occupy this. In other words, you are not the judge and the jury. You're not. God is the judge and the jury. Nevertheless, and I can't really judge anybody. Nevertheless, I have a personal interest in making sure that because I'm going to be influenced by my friends and mentors, and I'm forced into a position of judging them, right? So you always have to ask yourself about your mentor. Is this the kind of person I want as a mentor? And
Wow.
yes, I can't really understand him until I'm in his shoes. And yes, in the ultimate view of things, God is the judge. But I can't afford to be in the thrall of a mentor that's going to lead me astray. And therefore, I have to protect myself, right? And I have to make judgments, ironically, about my mentor, which is actually the opposite of what most people think about their mentors. Most people think, this is my mentor, I can't judge them, they're my mentor. Whatever they tell me, I can do. I think the Mishnah is saying the exact opposite. If they're your mentor, they're the one person you have to judge. They're the person you always have to ask yourself, is this the kind of person I want to be emulating? And you have to ask yourself, who do I want as my mentor? Who do I want to really emulate? And therefore, choose your mentor and figure it out carefully. Similarly with your friend. With your friend, he's the one person you have to ask, who do I want to be friends with? And if their actions seem sketchy, then it's time to look elsewhere for a friend.
Isn't it surprising that it doesn't mention? Isn't it surprising it doesn't mention spouse or parents?
Yeah, it is kind of interesting, right? Maybe because if you think about it, well, first of all, spouse might be friend,
Okay.
right, in a certain kind of way. So I'm not sure spouse isn't mentioned, but parents aren't. And maybe the answer there is that parents are the one people you can't divorce, right? I can get rid of a mentor. I can get rid of a friend or even a spouse, but I can't get rid of parents. And therefore, even if your parents are bad apples, right? I can't resort to it to completely excluding them from my life, and therefore, right, and therefore, I in the end of the day, I have to learn how to deal with them, and yeah, but so anyway, I think that there's a lot of wisdom in the Mishnah.
That's really, really fascinating.
To stay up to date with JTV content, click subscribe here if you're on YouTube and hit the alarm bell. And if you're on Facebook, hit the like button and under following, click see first. If you enjoy watching JTV content and want to help us continue to grow, please consider making a donation to us by clicking here.